You're listening to the Partisan Comms Podcast.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Welcome to episode 21. I'm Terrence. Throughout history, deception has been used as a tool for intelligence gathering, defense, and manipulation. Which brings us to the topic of this episode, which is the intriguing world of honeypots and how they are used in espionage. Honeypots, or honey traps, exemplify the power of enticing a target into a vulnerable position, and relies on the art of allure to exploit human or technological weaknesses to achieve a strategic objective. The tactic of honey trapping involves leveraging relationships for social, political, espionage, or monetary purposes, and the process of honey trapping can involve making contact with a individual or individuals who possess information or resources, and then attempt to lure those targets into false relationships. Some of these relationships may be physical or romantic in nature, all in an effort to gather information and leverage influence over their targets. In the digital security space, honeypots can serve as decoys intended to attract cybercriminals. In this situation, an organization might deploy a system that appears vulnerable in an attempt to attract attackers away from legitimate targets, while at the same time gathering information on the attack methods used and possibly gain insight into a hacker's behavior to combat future cyber threats. One interesting case involved GhostNet, which is a name given by researchers at the Information Warfare Monitor to a large-scale cyber espionage network discovered in 2009, where some sources allege digital honeypots helped uncover a widespread surveillance operation targeting embassies, government offices, and private institutions across multiple countries.
Canadian researchers say an electronic spying operation has gained access to computers in hundreds of government and private offices. The cybersecurity analysts based at the University of Toronto have issued a report on their nearly 2-year investigation. They found the spy network system, which they call GhostNet, infiltrated nearly 1,300 computers in 103 countries. Security researcher Nart Villanueva says a cyber attacker could control computers remotely.
You can just imagine what an attacker could do with this kind of tool in place, from retrieving all of the documents to recording all of the keystrokes, sending email as if it was you, because it really is coming from your email client on your computer.
One moment.
Tomorrow. Researchers say GhostNet targeted the offices of the Dalai Lama, the exiled Tibetan leader who China regards as a separatist. The Canadian researchers say in addition to spying on the Dalai Lama, they found the network's computer code on computers belonging to foreign ministries, embassies, and government offices. Analyst Greg Walton.
Just went through line by line, thousands of lines, looking for activity which was anomalous, if you like. And in that way, we uncovered this, the tip of the iceberg.
Walton is unable to verify whether the Chinese government was involved, but that the network was controlled by computers based mostly in China.
There are two reports that we're dealing with here, one from the University of Toronto, one from the University of Cambridge, and it all began after officials within the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama complained that they feared there had been a breach of their email system and their computing system. The report from Cambridge University deals specifically with the concerns coming from the office of the Dalai Lama, because last year they became suspicious, saying, quote, they sent an email invitation on behalf of His Holiness to a foreign diplomat, but before they could follow it up with a courtesy telephone call, the diplomat's office was contacted by the Chinese government and warned not to go ahead with the meeting. Nowhere in the report do they in fact name which diplomat that was, who was in fact contacted by the Chinese government. That then leads us to the bigger study, which was conducted by the University of Toronto. As you say, there are claims that almost 1,300 computers were infiltrated, 1,295 to be precise, in 103 countries. Up to 30% were considered to be high-value targets. And while the source of these attacks came from China, this report does state quite categorically, but attributing all Chinese malware to deliberate or targeted intelligence gathering operations by the Chinese state, in other words, the government, is wrong and misleading. Now, the reason for that, again, it is contained within this report, is quite simply the high number of Chinese internet users here, and also the fact that they're young and they're savvy. Last count, 295 million internet users in China, almost the same number as the entire population of the United States. And this report does say that these young users are in fact very patriotic, they're very savvy, they know what they're doing, they're very much there is a culture here within the young internet users of being able to use these kinds of cyber espionage tactics to breach computers. It's very easy to get information on the internet, especially for these Chinese users, to try and attack these sites. Now, over the weekend, CNN has been trying to contact officials here from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get their comment on all of this. We have not been able to reach anybody. However, it has been reported that other officials have spoken to media outlets like the Guardian newspaper, the New York Times, and in each of those instances, these officials have denied these reports describing these claims, especially of Chinese government involvement, as being nonsense. Christy?
Now, can you tell us more about the nuts and bolts of all this? What was the intent of this cybercrime ring? What were they out to accomplish?
Well, once again, that isn't exactly clear, but what we have learned from this report is that this does appear to have been a very sophisticated cyber espionage attack. Not only did it infiltrate email, being able to intercept and resend email, but also this malware or spyware could actually take control of a computer, activating cameras and recording devices. So it was very sophisticated without the user even knowing that it had in fact been hit by this kind of program, Christy.
And has there been any comment from the Chinese government or state media to this report?
Yeah. This is interesting. Once we said, like we said, there's been just a few comments from a couple of officials over the weekend. Nothing that CNN has been able to get from the actual government itself. But what we're expecting, though, in a couple of hours will be a fairly standard denial. When we've asked about these kind of stories, these reports in the past, it's always been completely denied by the officials at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In fact, they say this kind of thinking is just Cold War thinking. And then they leave it pretty much at arm's length. But what we've noticed in the past is that then the state media kicks in with a fairly concerted campaign trying to discredit those who have made these allegations in the past. Whether or not that happens now, we'll have to wait and see. What is also interesting, though, is we've been looking at the blogs this morning to see if there's been any comment there within China by the Chinese bloggers. There are a few reports, but mostly just translations of the article which appeared in the Guardian, the New York Times, and various other newspapers. Not a lot of comment yet. So whether or not that changes today, whether or not they get the green light, if you like, to go ahead and start criticizing this report or commenting on this report will be an indication of how the government sees this report coming out of these universities, both out of Cambridge and Toronto University.
Although I haven't been able to find any articles stating that the GhostNet network was directly lured by digital honeypots, there do appear to be claims decoy systems may have been indirectly helpful in studying GhostNet's interactions with exploited systems, and may have contributed to exposing the scope of the infiltration, which would potentially aid in the design of more effective future defenses. Despite their potential benefits, digital honeypots can come with risks. Skilled hackers can identify them and retaliate by launching counterattacks, and if a honeypot is compromised, it may in theory inadvertently provide hackers with a gateway to an organization's broader network. Unlike digital deception, honey traps are operated in the physical world, often relying on psychological manipulation techniques. Espionage agencies have long used honey traps to lure individuals into divulging classified information, whether through romantic entanglement or carefully crafted social interactions. These tactics exploit human emotions and weaknesses. One of history's notable spies, Mata Hari, personified the honey trap strategy during World War I. The Dutch dancer and courtesan allegedly gathered secrets for German intelligence. Her seductive charm won over military officials across Europe, allegedly allowing her to gather sensitive information.
A palpable tension held its grip on Paris in 1917. It was the third disastrous year of World War I. France was losing badly and looking for someone to blame. In mid-February, word spread through the city that one of the most famous women in Europe had been arrested and accused of spying for Germany, France's enemy in the war. Her name was Mata Hari. At the time of her arrest, Mata Hari was known across the continent as an exotic dancer. Her trial would bring her greater fame and infamy as one of history's most recognized secret agents. But whether Mata Hari actually spied at all is still subject to debate.
There's disagreement about almost everything about Mata Hari. Whether she spied, whether she didn't spy, whether she meant to spy. There's a tremendous fog of confusion about her.
It was a fog Mata Hari herself helped create. One that would ultimately be her downfall.
Mata Hari's trial was held in July of 1917, and she was found guilty of espionage and sentenced to death by firing squad at the age of 41. Though her exact impact remains debated, her story illustrates the effectiveness of honey traps in extracting sensitive information. As technology advances and digital espionage becomes more sophisticated, honeypots will continue evolving as cybersecurity tools. Similarly, honey traps, though ethically debated, remain relevant in intelligence operations. The effectiveness of these tactics underscores the enduring power of deception in warfare, cybersecurity, and human interactions. However, honey traps do raise some ethical concerns because they often manipulate emotions, leading to devastating personal consequences for those ensnared. Additionally, the line between espionage and entrapment can become blurred, bringing into question the legitimacy of such practices in modern intelligence work. As was the case with Mata Hari, who fell in love with a Russian officer named Vladimir Maslov, their love affair, which started sometime in 1916, influenced Mata Hari's actions during World War I, further complicating her interwoven life as both dancer and spy. The Cold War lasted from 1947 to 1991 and was a time of clandestine struggle, and intelligence agencies employed a wide array of tactics to gather sensitive information from adversaries. This era saw numerous instances of honey trap operations, particularly by Soviet intelligence. One such method was the use of female agents called Mazono girls, who were used by the KGB to spy on foreign targets, and some tactics included seduction. Additionally, Romeo agents were male spies trained to seduce female government employees in Western nations, coaxing them into revealing classified details. These intricate operations showcased how easily trust and attraction could be weaponized. These seductive operatives were trained to lure targets into compromising situations for the purpose of extracting secrets, and they were a useful asset in spycraft during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was particularly notorious for deploying honey traps as part of its espionage operations. The KGB, Russia's premier intelligence agency, frequently used female operatives to seduce Western diplomats and military officers. Operatives, often introduced as secretaries, journalists, or socialites, would establish relationships with high-ranking officials and coax out classified information. In some situations, they would stage compromising encounters that could later be used for blackmail or coercion, forcing the target to act as an informant under duress. These honey trap operations would rely on psychological manipulation and seduction to achieve their objectives. Aside from the KGB, other intelligence agencies, including the CIA and MI6, utilized agents who possessed charm, sophistication, and an ability to exploit human vulnerabilities. One of the most infamous Soviet honey trap operations was the case of John Vassall, a British civil servant in the Royal Navy. In the late 1950s, Soviet operatives lured him into a situation where compromising photographs were taken. He was then coerced into providing classified British naval secrets for several years before his eventual arrest in 1962. Western intelligence agencies recognize the effectiveness of honey trap operations and develop countermeasures to mitigate their impact. Officials were trained to recognize entrapment tactics, avoid socializing in vulnerable environments, as well as report any suspicious engagements with foreign individuals. The CIA, for example, educated its officers on potential threats posed by Soviet and Eastern Bloc operatives, encouraging discretion in interactions with foreign nationals. Additionally, the United States and its allies utilized their own versions of honey traps to extract intelligence from Soviet officials and defectors. While less publicly documented, Western intelligence agencies used operatives to infiltrate Soviet circles, employing charm and seduction to gather information. The life of a honey trap operative is full of danger, secrecy, and psychological strain. Some operatives were forced into long-term romantic engagements under false pretenses, making it difficult to separate their real emotions from their professional duties, resulting in moral conflicts, while others became disillusioned with their work. The risks were high, as exposure could lead to imprisonment, execution, or exile, particularly in the Soviet Union, where betrayal was harshly punished. Assignments varied depending on what information a given intelligence agency was seeking. For example, an assignment may consist of the agent initiating contact with a target through face-to-face interaction. From that point, an operative may attempt to take the communication further into other areas of communication, such as text, email, text messaging, or telephone calls. After the initial contact, operatives may propose setting up a second meeting with the target. Hotels often have been used in the past as useful meeting places to determine whether or not the target anticipates the relationship going further. The use of honey traps in espionage has a long and salacious history. It's one of the most classic tools in the spycraft playbook, blending psychological manipulation, seduction, and human weakness to achieve intelligence objectives. These types of tactics can be traced as far back as the era of the Greeks and Romans. Although there doesn't appear to have been a formal intelligence apparatus, the Greeks and Romans used infiltration tactics, informants, deception tactics, and reconnaissance to gather information. These tactics can be so effective they have been used throughout human history, and there are numerous examples of their effectiveness throughout the Cold War era. One such example was William Campbell's, who was a clerk who worked for the CIA and was seduced by a female KGB operative. Campbell's later sold a manual for the KH-11 spy satellite program to the Soviet Union in the 1970s. The KH-11 was the first American spy satellite to use electro-optical digital imaging and to offer real-time optical observations. Another example was the case of Clayton Lonetree, who was a United States Marine. In the mid-1980s, a KGB operative established a relationship with him, which enabled Soviet spies to obtain access into the U.S. Embassy in Moscow.
Members of Clayton Lonetree's family today began to assess the impact of yesterday's guilty verdict against the Marine. A jury of Marine officers found the St. Paul native guilty of 13 counts of spying while on the guard staff at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Lonetree's brother, Craig, says the family anticipated the verdict because the defense did not have an opportunity to present vital evidence. He also speculated as to why the government chose his brother for this trial.
And I think they thought, well, let's make a scapegoat out of somebody. And they probably knew my brother's national-owned descent, and they thought, well, who knows, maybe we pick him up. He's probably from a reservation.
Defense attorneys say they will appeal the verdict. Sentencing will come Monday in Virginia. 2 of the counts carry a sentence of life imprisonment.
Lone Tree provided the KGB with information about embassy staff and offices. And when the KGB attempted to blackmail him, that's when he decided to confess to a U.S. intelligence officer. Lone Tree was eventually convicted by a court-martial and was sentenced to 15 years. He was later released in 1996 after serving 9 years. One of the most sensational honey trap scandals in British history unfolded in the early 1960s with the Profumo affair. Christine Keeler, a young model, engaged in relationships with both British War Minister John Profumo and a Soviet diplomat. When the details of her affairs surfaced, the scandal not only led to Profumo's resignation, but also ignited fears of national security breaches, as Keeler's Soviet connections raised suspicions of espionage, underscoring the dangers of honey traps in political circles.
The face that brought down the Macmillan government in Britain in the early 1960s, model and escort Christine Keeler has died aged 75. She became notorious in 1963, when it became clear she was sleeping with the British Minister for War, John Profumo, at the same time as bedding the Soviet military attaché in London. It was the height of the Cold War, and after lying about their relationship, Profumo had to resign. It was Britain's biggest political scandal of the 20th century.
In the modern era, honey traps are an effective espionage tool for corporate deception and international politics. While technology has changed the nature of espionage, human vulnerability remains an ever-exploitable weakness. In 2008, the British MI5 prepared a document titled The Threat from Chinese Espionage, and a restricted version was distributed to hundreds of businesses and financial institutions throughout Britain. The document detailed Chinese efforts to blackmail Western business persons using sexual or romantic relationships. The document warned that Chinese intelligence agencies were attempting to establish long-term relationships and have been known to exploit those relationships to pressure targets into cooperating with them. In January of 2025, the U.S. government recently banned American personnel in China, as well as their family members and contractors with security clearances, from any romantic or sexual relationships with Chinese citizens. This policy was enacted by outgoing ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns.
And now we have to talk about America's love lockdown in China. When it comes to matters of the heart, the U.S. government has officially swiped left. American diplomats in China have been reportedly handed a new directive: absolutely no romantic entanglements with Chinese citizens. Forget flowers, flirting, or forbidden liaisons. The policy affects diplomats, their families, and contractors with security clearances. The new rule aims to prevent espionage threats posed by honey trap operations. Here are more details in our latest report.
In a world full of complicated relationships, leave it to international diplomacy to take "it's not you, it's national security" to new heights. If you thought dating was hard before, try doing it with a security clearance. The United States government has quietly issued what might be the most awkward HR memo in history. American government staff stationed in China, plus their families and any contractors with security clearances, are now strictly forbidden from engaging in any romantic or sexual shenanigans with Chinese citizens. Yes, all of them. And no, not even just coffee. According to reports, the rule was put in place in January by outgoing U.S. Ambassador Nicholas Burns. Apparently, he wanted to leave behind a legacy of broken hearts. While some agencies already frowned upon cozying up with the locals, this full-blown Cold War-era flashback takes things to another level. Even back in the day, diplomats in other countries could flirt, date, and even marry locals. But in China, not anymore. Previously, the rule was limited to guards and support staff at US embassies and consulates. But as of January, it's a complete romance lockdown on all the US missions in mainland China. Doesn't matter if you're in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenyang, Wuhan, or even Hong Kong. But there are also exceptions for people in pre-existing love stories. These couples need to file official paperwork begging for Cupid's approval. And if their request is denied, they will have to choose between their job and Mandarin love. And if you're found violating the rules, then the official will have to immediately bid goodbye to their posting in China. Romantic, right? So why all the drama? Intelligence officials say China is still playing a Cold War game of honey trap. Here, flirtation can be a form of espionage. US personnel are reportedly briefed before arriving in China with real-life cautionary tales of seductive spies and love-struck diplomats who accidentally spilled secrets between pillow talk. It's all very Mission Impossible minus the soundtrack. Back in 1987, similar policies were introduced after a US Marine in Moscow got a little too friendly with a Soviet agent. But those rules thawed out in the 1990s. Now, with diplomatic tension back in fashion, the romance ban has returned from retirement. Less swan song and more spy-proof chastity belt. Now, here comes the fun part. The new rule hasn't been announced publicly, but it has been communicated to the American staff through official channels, emails, and presumably a few awkward meetings. The State Department, in classic fashion, declined to comment.
Prior to January 2025, there appears to have been a policy that limited American personnel from romantic or sexual relationships with Chinese citizens when working in a support staff role at the U.S. Embassy. However, this policy was broadened to become a blanket ban following concerns raised by the United States Congress. However, under the revised mandates, personnel engaged in pre-existing relationships with Chinese citizens may request an exemption, terminate the relationship, or vacate their post should the exemption request be denied. The penalty for personnel violating the mandate may result in them being ordered out of China immediately, and they may face other disciplinary actions. Prior to the new rules in January 2025, American personnel were only required to report any immediate contact with Chinese citizens, but were not prohibited from romantic or sexual relationships. The reasoning for such strict rules is because the American government considers China a high-risk country for honey trap operations. According to an Associated Press article from April 2025, a former CIA analyst, Peter Mattis, said, quote, "There were at least 2 publicized cases in which Chinese agents seduced American diplomats in China. This new rule change suggests that the Chinese have gotten a lot more aggressive at trying to access the embassy and U.S. government. Chinese law requires citizens to cooperate with the intelligence services, so even if a Chinese girlfriend is not a spy herself, she may be required to introduce her diplomatic boyfriend to an uncle who is," end quote. Prohibitions on foreign diplomats from having romantic relationships with nationals is not new, and during the Cold War era, some countries within the Soviet bloc had similar restrictions in place to counter honey trap operations. While the State Department doesn't take satisfaction in intruding upon the lives of their diplomats, it's an unfortunate fact of the role, as any of their personnel could be potential targets of intelligence services because access to classified information is a function of their job. The perils of honey traps are not only an overseas matter, but also extend to the home front. A 2024 Daily Mail article details that it's believed by intelligence experts that approximately 6 brothels located in the cities of Boston and Washington, D.C. were set up by a foreign national as a honey trap operation. It's not clear if the operation's intent was to aid China, Russia, South Korea, or even possibly Israel. What is known is the operation targeted politicians, defense contractors, military officers, and national security contractors who held security clearances, according to prosecutors. Other clientele included professors, lawyers, corporate executives, and scientists. Since the days of the Cold War, honey traps have remained a relevant tactic, especially with help from technological advances which have made catfishing and sextortion easier with fake profiles, dating apps, and a variety of social media apps to lure unsuspecting targets. Some online traps are seemingly more innocent, such as a fake job posting on LinkedIn, which may turn into a paid trip to China, and once on foreign soil, intelligence operatives and honey traps attempt to manipulate their target. While mandates from the State Department cutting off any type of romantic or sexual relationship may seem harsh, the objective is to mitigate the risk of personnel falling into an espionage trap. While cutting off physical contact may lessen those chances, the danger of online seduction will likely become even more prevalent. However, despite these measures and push for awareness, these types of espionage tactics will likely continue to be employed because they are effective. This was the case when a suspected Chinese intelligence operative established a relationship with both national and local politicians from 2011 to 2015. The suspected operative was a Chinese national named Christine Fang, also known as Fang Fang. Fang Fang targeted up-and-coming politicians in California's Bay Area, as well as across other parts of the country. She engaged in extensive networking, campaign fundraising, and used her charisma to establish romantic and sexual relationships with 2 Midwestern mayors, 1 former elected official, as well as her most notable target, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell from California. Fang Fang assisted with campaign fundraising for Swalwell's 2014 re-election campaign, as well as with placing at least 1 intern in Swalwell's office. She also volunteered for the campaign of California Democrat Ro Khanna during an unsuccessful House race in 2014. However, Khanna did eventually win the seat in 2016. At some point, federal authorities had become suspicious of Fang Fang, and while investigating her, she had apparently become aware federal authorities were looking into her activities. And in 2015, she fled the United States. It's believed that she returned to China.
A bombshell new report says a suspected Chinese spy targeted California politicians. And one of her biggest targets was Bay Area Representative Eric Swalwell. KPIX 5's Andrea Borba live at the Chinese consulate in San Francisco to break it all down, how it worked. Andrea?
Well, this spy was allegedly a student who had close contacts with people here inside the Chinese consulate until she left the country about 5 years ago. This woman, Christine Fang, a Chinese national, was a student at Cal State East Bay and president of the Chinese Student Association. The FBI says she was also a spy who was trying to cozy up to Bay Area politicians, the mayor of Fremont, volunteering for Ro Khanna's campaign, and even a young Congressman Eric Swalwell. San Jose State professor Dr. Karthika Saskakumar says this form of spycraft is common.
These were individuals who were important in local politics, but potentially could become really important in national politics.
The information was first revealed in an Axios article yesterday, but this is not recent. The contacts with the Bay Area politicians date back years to the early 2010s, and Fang is no longer in the U.S.
And that one fine day in 2015, she went to China and she didn't come back.
Former Fremont Mayor Bill Harrison says he got a call from the FBI on a Friday and sweated over what could have happened for an entire weekend.
We don't have national secrets. We don't have special secrets. What would they think about Fremont? I get now that, from some of the reports they talk about it's a long game play. I get that. They're aiming for some higher fish than me, which obviously, but one of the reasons that I have no problem talking is that I know I didn't do anything wrong. Dr.
Saskakumar says incidents like this happen regularly.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, and I find it incredibly rich. Mr. Swalwell is going to come to this committee and lecture us about how China penetrates our government. I think that's something he may know a thing or two about. But let's talk about how China has penetrated the highest levels of this government, including this president and this White House, because I think the visual is incredibly important.
Our final example comes from a 2011 ABC News article about a salacious sex scandal that rocked the top levels of the Chinese government, which appeared to be supported by released U.S. State Department cables. In August of 2007, the finance minister of China, Qin Renqing, resigned citing personal reasons, and no additional information was provided. However, news outlets in Hong Kong began to report rumors that the finance minister established a romantic relationship with a woman who had apparently been associated with several other Chinese officials. According to the released U.S. State Department cables, investigators suspected the woman wasn't just the finance minister's mistress, but was an intelligence operative working for Taiwan. It's believed the spy had charmed not only the finance minister, but several other top Chinese officials, and had lured them into her honey trap operation. There's a saying that mice die in mouse traps because they don't understand why the cheese is free. And I suppose the same thing could be said for anyone caught in a honey trap operation, as the consequences could have life-altering outcomes. The use of these types of espionage traps demonstrates the power of psychological manipulation and spying, proving that information and influence can be obtained not only through brute force, but through subtle and seductive means as well. As intelligence agencies continue to evolve, so too will the methods used to exploit human nature. The history of these tactics serves as a reminder that espionage is not solely about codes and encryption. It's about people, emotion, and the art of deception as well. Whether used on targets in person or online, both demonstrate that the greatest vulnerabilities often lie in the subtle art of persuasion, whether safeguarding digital networks or securing state secrets. Deception remains a potent tool, proving that sometimes the most dangerous traps are the ones designed to be irresistible. Honey traps were a formidable tool in Cold War intelligence warfare, demonstrating the lengths to which nations would go to gain strategic advantages. While the Cold War may have ended, the practice of using sexual enticement and intelligence gathering remains relevant in modern espionage, showcasing the continued interplay between power, secrecy, and manipulation. That's all I have for this episode. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, or write a review.
There is a signal broadcast every second of every day through our television sets.
Mark my words. AI is far more dangerous than nukes.
Science and technology are propelling us forward at accelerating rates.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.